Ronnie for inviting me. This has been
Ronnie.
Ronnie has this amazing energy to bring groups together and inspire everybody. So just keep doing your awesome work, man. It's like you're doing a great job. Thank you. And Dave, the raw food trucker, thanks for sharing from the heart. Thanks for sharing from the heart, man. It's like wow. What a big,
thank you for saving my heart. I wouldn't be here today.
What a big heart this man has. You know, seriously. So, and thanks, Maddie, for that. You know, it's my grandfather passed away at the age of 96 in 2009, and that was his religion. He had actually that framed up on his wall, and I used to read it all the time. So, this is desiderata, which means something to strive for.
Yeah, what you desire.
Yeah. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
So for those who don't know who I am, I'm Steve Adler, aka Sacred Steve, founder of Sacred Chocolate. And you know, for me, chocolate is really a symbol of love, and that's really what I want to talk about mostly tonight here in the short period of time I have. It's, you know, chocolate is, you know, all things considered, probably the world's greatest food, only because it's so widely loved, it's so accepted. It's, you know, obviously a superfood par excellence, as we're learning. It's an amazing delivery mechanism to get everything into your body, from herbs to, you know, weight loss programs to weightlifting programs to whatever it is. I mean, you'll see chocolate all over the place. So I feel really honored and blessed that you know, I've had this relationship with David Wolfe the last, you know, 15 years or so. And he, you know, turned me on to raw cacao as a superfood about 10 years ago. And he just kind of kept throwing raw cacao beans at me and said, look, this is the greatest, you know, medicinal food of all time. And I used to bite into a raw cacao bean. I wasn't that stoked about it because for me, it was just a little too bitter, I mean, for my palate. But I could put them in a smoothie and stuff like that. It was all good. And then I went to one of his amazing raw chocolate parties in New York City once, and people were just high on raw cacao. And then I got it. I was like, wow, not only is this like a superfood, you know, and it's really good for the body, it's good for mood elevation and it's all this sort of stuff, but it's a natural high. People are just naturally getting happy by eating raw cacao. And I said, what a wonderful thing. So that party kind of inspired me to kind of get into, can I actually make, you know, besides raw cacao smoothies and raw cacao truffles and brownies and all this sort of stuff, could I make a finely tempered, really high-end raw chocolate bar using raw cacao? And after playing around for a year or so, I figured out that, yeah, you can. It's actually just as easy as making any other kind of chocolate. So I got into it, and basically in 2006 we started Sacred Chocolate, and now we're into our 6th year, and we're now for the first time moving to a bigger facility, actually in 2 weeks. So it's really exciting times for us, yeah. It's all been sweat equity, just money out of our own pockets. It's not been any, you know, huge investors or anything like that. And so,
where is it?
Sacred Chocolate's actually made over in San Rafael right now, not far from here. Yeah, and then we're moving to Novato, which is just also in Marin. So anyway, you want me to just say a few things about theobromine. Obviously, you know, chocolate, Theobroma cacao is the name of the chocolate tree. And theobromine is actually really rare in the plant world. It only shows up in like 19 plants. And it's interesting in that it is a stimulant, similar to caffeine, but also kind of opposite to caffeine in a lot of ways, in that it's a smooth muscle relaxant. So it actually dilates the whole blood vessel, the whole vascular system, which is amazing. It's not as powerful a stimulant as caffeine. And it also, not theobromine, but chocolate itself has a few other compounds in it that make the blood actually more slippery, these dopamine compounds. So besides...
Like chocolate, not theobromine, but chocolate?
Yeah, chocolate itself has some dopamine compounds, 2 dopamine compounds in it that actually make the blood, quote, more slippery. So it makes the blood flow through the whole vascular system, you know, more easily. And so that's, I mean, obviously you're a testament to that, right? I mean,
absolutely.
Basically, you know, it saved Dave the raw food trucker's life, basically. So, yeah. So I'm here just to basically, you know, not so much talk about Sacred Chocolate. Obviously, I have Sacred Chocolate here for sale. If anybody wants to purchase it from me, that's great. but I really want to talk more about kind of the foundation behind Sacred Chocolate and the energy that goes into Sacred Chocolate, and what Dave talked about, that he felt that there was something like spiritual happening there. And there is something spiritual happening with Sacred Chocolate, and that's really my message here. What is that about? And that energy is really the same energy as like the family prayer that we just did. Putting that love and that intention into the food. Because when you do that, it alters the food on a very subtle level. Sometimes it can alter the food in a very major level. And so your intention and your love and your prayers that go into your food are super, super important. Actually, it's probably the most important thing, believe it or not. And the reason is because when you're like in love with something, or when you're loving something, whether it's another person or a pet or just the work that you're doing, you develop a fundamentally different relationship with that thing that you're in love with or that you're loving. And what ends up happening is a communication gets set up. All communication actually is founded in love. And when I'm talking about love here, most people, when they just hear the word love, they kind of go right to like romantic love or being in love with somebody or their partner. But I'm really talking about like the universal love of, say, God or the divine or the creator of the universe, the foundational force energy, the Newman of reality, if you will, the total juice that fuels life. That's what I'm talking about here. And so that love is the basis of all communication, actually. Without love, there can't even be communication taking place. So when you're loving your food, you're actually setting up a communication channel with the food. And that communication channel is actually on a very subtle molecular way basically instructing the food how to best nourish your body, and it's also instructing your body how to best absorb the food. So there's a different relationship that's set up, and what it does is it causes everything to be more efficient. Whatever the food was that was served, it was just, there was so much love and happiness and amazing time that I just felt so deeply nourished by just the whole event. And it's the love that's there that's really nourishing you, and it's coming through the food too, because there's a lot of love maybe that went into the preparation of that food, and a lot of intention and good vibes and expectation of coming together with loved ones. So that nourishes you. So that's what happens at Sacred Chocolate, and I'm the foundation of that. I personally pray over all the chocolate whenever I think about it. I'm not always thinking about it, but whenever I think about it, like right now, I immediately bring all that chocolate that's in the factory right this second and out on the store shelves into my own sacred center in my being, and just pray that that chocolate is filled with love so that it best nourishes everybody out there in whatever subtle ways that it needs to nourish people, whether it's on the physical or on the more spiritual, emotional plane, psychological, whatever it is. So that's the whole foundation of Sacred Chocolate, is that it's really at a very high level designed to be a healing sacrament, designed to be my personal imprint in the world to help people with their lives, help people with their bodies and all the stuff that they're going through. In this case, Dave obviously was going through some major trauma, right? And I feel totally honored and blessed that my love imprinted had an effect on him, and it helped him in his life. And so that's really the foundation of my message. This is, I want to tell a pretty graphic story actually, that kind of fits in with this message. It's a pretty intense story, so I just want you to be braced if necessary. But it just popped into my head, so when something pops into my head, I figure I better share it. So this is actually a true story, and it was, and some of you may have heard it, maybe Ronnie or some other people here have heard this, but it was told to me by a very close friend and healer of mine, and it actually occurred. It happened in a Buddhist monastery, basically there were, and I don't know the exact time that happened, but there was, for whatever reason, a very lively discussion taking place on how the monks should eat their bowl of rice. They were sitting down to dinner to eat their bowl of rice, and they were debating on like, well, should we pray over it, or should we eat it in silence? Should we, all this sort of stuff? They didn't know. So one of the head monks said, well, let me just relate to you a story that's been passed down from the Buddha himself. The Buddha actually was asked this question at one point, and the Buddha responded with this answer. And so this is how the story goes. The Buddha said, well, this is how you should eat your rice. Imagine that you are given a very important mission. And this mission is to walk across a desert to deliver an important message to a far off, kingdom, if you will. And this message has to be delivered, otherwise millions of people will perish. They will die for whatever reason. Maybe it's a message of, surrender, like one kingdom is not going to go to war with this kingdom, or whatever it is. But you are responsible for delivering this message that will literally save millions of people's lives. So you have to also go, because nobody else, for whatever the circumstances are, you have to take your child with you, your young child, your 10-year-old child with you, and so that's an added difficulty. But you decide that you've got to do it because that's the mission. And so you pack up all the water and all the food that you possibly can. You set off across the desert. And it's 100 miles or something like this, and finally you get about halfway through the desert and you realize that, well, you've run out of all your food and water, and it becomes very apparent to you that your child is actually going to die in the desert. Your child's not going to make it. And and eventually, unfortunately, out in the middle of the desert, your child does die, and you of course are completely distraught and feel like this is a total failure and that you can't go on, and not only is your child going to die, but millions of others are going to die as well. And so finally, after maybe sitting there in prayer and meditation for a long time over this disaster, you realize that if you have any chance at all to make it across the desert to deliver this message, you're going to have to eat your child. And so that thought is horrific. But maybe after another couple of days of meditation, you finally realize that this is your only choice, and you choose to do that. And as a result, you're successful. You deliver the message, and millions are saved. And the Buddha says that you should eat your rice, your bowl of rice, as if you're eating your own child. And that's kind of intense and graphic. But it drives a super strong point that if you can get into that space each and every time, it's like the food doesn't, it becomes something else. It becomes something that's almost not even of this world. It becomes something that is just part of God, actually. And so, like Sai Baba says, food is God, God is food. And so ultimately, how we're nourished and what we're nourished by is love. And food is just, like Ronnie said, adding some extra information. And that information is really enhanced if that food is delivered with love, through love, by love. And not only that, you're honoring all the loving beings who have brought that food to you, including the loving beings that have given up their lives so that you can eat it. So that's like my huge message for this evening. And that's, my intention with Sacred Chocolate, obviously, is cacao is a very sacred food to begin with, obviously because of its history, because of its medicinal properties, but also because of the fact that it is probably the world's greatest food, all things considered. And if we can elevate it through our own prayers and love, then it takes it to a whole new level. And I know Ronnie's all about taking things to the next level. So, yeah, and I just want to say that, when you're coming from that space of love and gratitude and prayer, food becomes honestly less of a focus. I know when I first got into raw foods personally, I became super enthusiastic about my change in lifestyle and my change in diet. And you know, for many years, I was very fanatical about it because it really was benefiting myself on all levels, from, you know, cleaning out the temple and feeling lighter and stronger and more clear and more spiritual and more aware. It was amazing. It's like a long sustained fast. It's like a juice feast, really getting into raw foods. But ultimately, I realized that, you know, you can't kind of eat your way to God, and really, you know, the foundation behind the whole thing is, you know, getting what the raw foods really does in a lot of ways is it allows you to get more in touch with the God within you. The reason is because in a lot of subtle ways, raw foods tends to be high in water. Water is very magnetic, and it really supports the magnetic nature of love. Love has an aspect to it that's magnetic in nature. And from an alchemical standpoint, the water is very magnetic, and it supports all of your own internal sacred space, your sacred heart, whatever you want to call it, the divine within, the sacred center, the seat of the soul, there's a million names that people call it. But that is one of the reasons why raw foods is so eye-opening for people, because in a lot of ways it is kind of a way to kind of break through and start becoming the love that you really are, that you want to be always. So it helps you become a more loving person. And I'm sure a lot of people who have been into raw foods, maybe here for a while, you can tell all of a sudden, not only does it make you more aware, more sensitive, and make you kind of become more of a loving person, but it also, you know, starts elevating your consciousness as a result, and it also starts wanting you to get your love out in the world. You know, so all of a sudden, you know, it is that stepping stone. It is that kind of unique path, and there are a lot of unique paths, obviously, to get to that state of being. But raw foods happens to be a wonderful one, and it happens to work. So I really recommend it, obviously, and that's obviously why I'm into the raw chocolate business and into raw foods myself. So, you know, that's what I encourage everybody to do, is to be the love that they are and do whatever it is in your life to basically, you know, get out of your head about that. You know, a lot of times what ends up happening is there's a little bit of a struggle as the ego, you know, is kind of attached to prior identities, prior patterns, history, you know, all this sort of stuff, and then all of a sudden as you step into more of a loving space and more of a loving existence for yourself, sometimes your head will come in and kind of, or your ego, I should say, will come in and kind of play tricks on you, or kind of say, hey, wait a second, or make you feel uncomfortable, or do all these sort of things. And don't let that stop you. Just realize that that's part of the process, and just let that kind of continue to go and flush away, and before long it just becomes nothing, and it just becomes something in the past that you just grew through. So that's what I really want to encourage people to do, is, you know, as you come up with all kinds of mental excuses about whatever you're doing in your life, you know, what maybe you feel is holding you back, or where you're trying to break through to the next level in your own life, you know, get back into your heart and gratitude, you know, because that's the foundation, you know, is get back into your beingness. And as you do that more and more, whatever was driving you crazy in your head all of a sudden becomes way less important. You know, so there's the human experience, for whatever reason, has this little dance that it has to go through between like your spiritual center and your heart, and this whole power that actually drives not only your life but your every single cell in your body, and every single cell in your body is actually constantly tuned into the love that's coming through your heart, your sacred heart, you know. So, but the thing is like you're having, you know, that little experience, but then again, you're having this mind experience, and finally it comes down to, is the mind, are you finally going to allow your mind to surrender completely to your heart? That's the trick. That's actually the yoga. That's the ultimate. And when you get to that point where finally your mind, no matter what comes up, and believe me, even down the road after you've you, and all of a sudden you'll see your mind will come in and say, wait a second, but I wanted this in my life, or I want that in my life, and I'm not going to be happy until I have that or this or that. That's just from your mind from way back, really, kind of grabbing onto something, and maybe that your life just wasn't all about that course. That maybe that was just a fantasy or an illusion. You really have to search your heart and say, well, who am I really? What am I really about? What is my greatest gift? How am I going to get my greatest gifts out there? Right? And so that's like, I was just listening to an interview that David Wolf did of Dr. Michael Beckwith.
Oh, yeah.
And that was a great thing, what he said. He said, I'm now putting out this part about, allowing what's inside you, in your heart, to come forth and be birthed. A lot of people finally get down the practice of setting goals and accomplishing those goals and doing that sort of thing in their life. But what about a lot of that's mind-driven stuff. What about like what's your real gift? What is it like when you leave this planet, and you will leave sometime? I don't care, it may be tomorrow, hopefully it's not, or it could be 100 years from now. But you have to really always, and that's where the mind will never go. You have to realize that, knock on wood, we're all here tomorrow, but there's also a chance that we may not be here tomorrow for whatever reason. And, if that were really the case, if you're like, man, I have a crystal ball and I'm seeing a tragic accident, I die tomorrow, what would you be doing right now?
Wow.
What would you be doing right now if all of a sudden some genie came down and said, look, I got bad news for you. Here's the crystal ball, and there's nothing that can be done. There's a Mack truck, and boom, and it's over. What would you be doing right now? Like, what's your gift that you would have to just get out there, or pick up the phone and tell somebody you love them, or spend time with your pet, or whatever it is, or your kid, But that's the sort of thing that, you really want to focus on, because that sort of stuff is not the the imagining tragedy or anything, of course, but focus on what your real priorities are in life to get your your love out there, your gift out there. And so that's my big message for tonight, is really and Ronnie kind of gave me about 30 minutes. I don't know, are we up about 29 minutes? We're still good.
We're up to like
okay, good. We can we can change the course of this conversation a little bit, because I love talking about this stuff, but to make it more real for people here, it's always great to do a few little exercises. Because until you have an experience, it's all just intellectual stuff. And believe me, you may not forget it tomorrow, but you'll forget it eventually, unless you're reminded of it, or unless something triggers the memory. But when you experience something physically, then it tends to stay with you a little longer. So there's a cool exercise that I love doing with people. It's very simple, that kind of gets people more into the heart space. And obviously that's been my focus for the last 10 years, is working on myself to get more in the heart space. And when you're in that heart space, your experience with reality is a little bit different, and your experience with other people is different when you're in that heart space, because you're not operating so much from judgment, you're not operating so much from the mind and the ego. You're operating on a much deeper, more fundamental level, where there's a lot more acceptance, a lot more strength, a lot more confidence, actually, and a lot more, love and allowance and acceptance. It's just great. So let's just do this quick exercise. And I want to, I'm talking about the heart here. And when I talk about the heart, I'm not talking about the physical heart, and I'm not talking about the heart chakra, that's a whole electromagnetic system that's in your body. I'm actually talking about this kind of center point in your being that, your soul kind of comes through in birth, and then it's going to exit at death. And so this point is where you're connected to the divine 24/7, whether you acknowledge it, whether you think about it, whether you believe it or not. It's just kind of, from my experience, what is. And so the more you can be in that space, the more you're kind of in a state of communion with the divine. You're more in a state of, you know, prayer, basically. It doesn't have, words don't have to be spoken. So this is an easy little exercise I love to do, and just what I want everybody here to do is just take your awareness to a place within your body. And just, I'm going to direct it. I'm going to say, take your awareness right now to your right knee. And just feel, kind of feel in your body your right knee. Like, you know, and interestingly enough, just to point out that you're more than your body, before I even said that, you weren't really aware of your right knee. In other words, you weren't really feeling your right knee, right? Until I actually said, okay, go to your right knee and feel that you have a right knee. So just by the very fact that you weren't aware of your right knee before I brought your attention to that, means that you're more than just your physical body. Because if you were just your physical body, you would only be experiencing all of your body at any given moment. You see what I'm talking about? So right there tells you that you're a much more complex being than just your physical body. So anyway, take your awareness to your right knee, and then just ask this simple question: does that feel, and the key word here is feel, does that feel like the center of your being? Does that feel like the center of your totality as a human being, as a soul, as a force of nature? Does that feel like the center point?
No.
For most people, they'll either say they don't know, or for most people say no. Because, and just by the fact that you can discern that it doesn't feel like the center of your being, basically suggests that there is a center point. You see what I'm saying? Because unless you could have made that discernment, then you couldn't even discern if a center even existed. But the very fact that that it feels to you like it's not the center of who you are, means that there probably is a center point. So now just take your awareness to someplace else, say like your left elbow, and ask the same question. You know, does that feel like the center of your whole being? Again, most people say no. And you can do this experiment yourself with other points of your body, right? You can do things like take your awareness now to the center of your brain, inside your head, the center of your brain, and ask, again, the key word is feel. Does that feel like the center of your being? That one's harder for a lot of people. I find for myself, if I'm really honest with myself, which I have been for a long time on this exercise, it's not. It doesn't feel like the center of my being. So now the exercise is go there. Go to the center. Go to the center point of your being, wherever that is. Just go there right now. And it may take some work. You may have to like zero in on it. It may take years to zero in on it, actually. But if you do that, and then live there all the time, and be there all the time, then especially not only are you, when you're at that center point and you're just interacting with the outside world, it's a different experience. It really is. And when you're interacting with other people from that point in space, it's a different experience. It's a lot less judgmental, it's a lot less chattery, it's a lot less small talk, it's just a lot more real, actually. And it's a lot more loving, and it's a lot more powerful, and it's a lot more respectful. Because this space has all these higher intelligences associated with it. This sacred space has the intelligences of like unity, love, life, respect, honesty, kindness, justice. So when you're operating from this space, you're operating from those higher intelligences. And so those higher intelligences are not what's going on up here. Up here is a computer. Up here is operating in probabilities, if-then statements. And judgments, literally. Like, okay, you know, according to my past conditioning, that's bad or wrong. And as soon as that happens, then you've set up this separation, and then there's all this kind of tension and polarities in place. You know, and that happens even very subtly, even when you're talking to somebody or interacting with somebody. It's a completely different experience. And I personally believe, my personal experience is when you're operating from that space, you know, like it says in the Bible, you kind of are loving your neighbor as yourself. You're being the love that you are, and you know, you are basically saying namaste to somebody else, even though you might be carrying on a conversation, because you know, you're basically honoring the love that they are, and that love is the divine, basically. So that would be like my most important message tonight, is to like put that into practice. You know, put that, the love that you are, in practice. Be that love that you are, and interact with everybody in your life.
It was about two and a half years of this process of emotional overeating and realizing that I'd been on a dead food diet from the moment I was born because I was bottle fed, and realizing how much at 430 pounds my cravings controlled me rather than me controlling my cravings. And I learned how to do this thing where for me to overcome my cravings, I had to sit and be quiet, and it's almost like what you talked about. Could I feel it in the left elbow or the right knee? Where is the center of my being? And now with emotions, they moved around. They moved around my body. And most of them would settle in the duodenal area. Yet when I experienced that, when you talked about that, I was just like, no, this is not the center of my body. No, this is not my center of my body. Now, when it got to the brain, I had some confusion about that. I wasn't sure. But instinctively inside, I knew it was my heart. And I just am utterly amazed that as you talk about this, for anybody that's struggling,